Chapter 30. It was not long before we approached the wooded outskirts of a little village. Its name was Lodgecott, as we would later learn. When we came out from the trees, we saw cultivated fields. Men, women, and children were hard at work, just as at Stromford, plowing, weeding, and hoeing. The clothes they wore could have come right from my home, too. Here and there sheep and cattle grazed. I found it a marvel that I could see so much of the world, yet find it much the same. As we passed the fields, people paused in their work to look at us. At first, Bear ignored them. Only when we drew closer to the village itself did he pause and scrutinize what lay ahead. "I don't see any signs of trouble," he said. I looked around. "What kind of trouble?" I asked. "The people looking for you. Now play." Though nervous, I put the pipe to my mouth and began to make music. Even as I did, Bear began his dance. So it was that we entered the village. If the village of Lodgecott had been exchanged with Stromford, I don't think the world would have noticed. It contained the same cluster of small dwellings along a single rough road with but one or two structures larger than the rest. Every house was roofed with thatch, with walls of wattle and daub. A stone church with a stubby tower stood close to the village center. On a low hill, not far away, I spied a manor house. It was larger than the other houses, but not by very much. As we came into the village proper, dogs, pigs, and children approached us with a snuffling curiosity. They made sure to keep their distance. It was harder to say who was dirtier, the children or the beasts. Women emerged from cottages to stare at us guardedly, keeping their younger children behind their skirts. One of these women had a whispered exchange with a child, who promptly raced off toward the church. Remembering what I'd been told, I, still playing music, headed straight for the church, too. Even as we approached it, a priest emerged, no doubt alerted by the child. He was a younger man than Father Quinnell, short, thin, with round eyes and the stubble of an ill-shaven beard. He did not appear very clean. His robes were quite soiled. Frowning, he stood before the church doors, hands clasped before him. I stepped aside and let Bear approach. He danced right up to where the priest stood, and then, to my astonishment, halted and sank to his knees, pulling off his cap. I stopped playing, and hoped my unease did not show. "Most Reverend Father," Bear said in a voice loud enough so all onlookers might hear, "I, known as the Bear, am a juggler. My son and I have made our way from the city of York, going toward Canterbury to perform sacred penance. We do humbly beseech your blessing." The priest visibly softened. "My boy and I beg your gracious permission to perform some simple songs and dance for the greater glory of God, for this village, and for His Grace King Edward, England's warrior king, with whom I had the honor of fighting on the victorious fields of France." Then Bear bowed his head, but tilted it somewhat sideways, so as to keep an eye on me. I think he even winked. The priest looked at Bear, then at me, then at Bear again. "Do you know sacred songs?" "I do," said Bear. Hands clapped together in prayer, he began to sing. "Mary, maiden, gracious and free, vessel of the Trinity, who graciously listens unto me as I greet thee with my song, though my feet unclean be and my hopes remain unborn. Thou art the queen of paradise, of heaven, of earth, and all that is. Thou give birth to the king of bliss, without a sin or sore, putting to rights all who are poor, winning life for us evermore." At the conclusion of his song, Bear bowed his head, crossed himself, and clasped his hands over his chest, the image of humility. The priest was clearly pleased. Smiling, he raised his hands over Bear's head and pronounced a blessing. At this, Bear jumped up and nodded to me. I took it up to be a signal to resume my playing, which I did with gusto. It was not long before most of the townspeople had gathered around us in a great circle. Off to one side, I played the music, while Bear performed in the center. Midway through his dance, he gathered up his leather balls and began to juggle. I could hear oohs and ahs from the crowd as Bear added first a third ball and then a fourth, and then when he stepped forward and snatched a mazer from the hands of one of the onlookers and added it to the revolving mix, there was laughter and applause. The young man from whom he'd taken the mazer was a small, one-eyed youth. He wore a patch over his other eye. He also had a thin, scraggly beard that seemed designed to proclaim him older than he was. Though others roared at Bear's antics, this young man took offense at Bear's gambols and, with growing anger, made 3 attempts to snatch his mazer back. Each time Bear, with great dexterity, seemed to offer him the mazer, but at the last moment tossed it high. This was done to the great hilarity of the crowd, but to the increasing resentment of the young man. Finally, muttering curses under his breath, the young man stormed away. No one seemed to care. Attentive to what I had been taught, I approached Bear. Still dancing and juggling, he inclined his head to allow me to remove his cap. I took it. Holding it before me, I moved about, saying nothing, but begging for coins. To my great delight, we received a few pennies, as well as some bread. When Bear was finally done and stood all in a sweat, people gathered around him, even as children surrounded me and pelted me with questions. What's your name? Where are you from? Where are you going? How'd you learn such things? Is your father the biggest man in the world? Were among the questions I was asked. I started to respond honestly, but caught myself and gave another name, another place. As for Bear, remembering what he had said, I claimed him for my father. At length, Bear called me to his side. Led by the priest, who was nothing but smiles now, we entered the church. Many of the village followed us inside. One of them, I noticed, was the one-eyed young man who had returned. He gazed at Bear with such malevolence I thought he might offer harm. The church was like my own at Stromford, though with different imagery on the walls. In particular, there was a vision of Jesus harrowing hell, the demons frightening to behold. Before the altar, both Bear and I knelt, and I, at least, prayed. "And where will we be going next?" the priest asked afterward. The onlookers seemed as interested in our answers as was the priest. "To Great Wexley for the fair on the feast of John the Baptist," Bear returned, "but always toward Canterbury," he added. "There are many villages hereabout," the priest informed us, "but you need to be on the alert for a notorious murderer." I had been gazing at the images on the walls, and now I turned to listen. "What do you mean?" Bear said to the priest. "At a village north of here, I'm not sure which, a boy went mad. After robbing the manor house, he killed a priest." I hastily looked down, lest I give myself away, but as I shifted I became aware that the one-eyed man was staring right at me. "God mend all," Bear cried with horror, making the sign of the cross. "Can't they find him?" "No one knows where he's fled," the priest said, "but an official came here, along with a troop of armed men. They say the youth is very dangerous. He's been declared a wolf's head. There's a 20-shilling reward for taking him dead or alive." "I'm grateful for your warning," Bear said, stony-faced. "We would love to earn that money. Who is your lord here?" "Lord Furnival," the priest replied, "and though he's been gone for these 14 years, we've received word that, give thanks to God, though gravely ill, he's at last returned to England. We pray daily that he may recover and that we may see him soon." "God is kind to those who love him," Bear said. "How did you learn the news?" "He sent a courier, a man named Dubray." With many gracious words, Bear took leave of the priest. Then he mingled with the townspeople and asked them many questions about their crops, their harvests, and the life they led. And though I wished desperately to speak to him, I kept away.